Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Kalayim, Peirik Gimel, Halacha Hey, and Halacha Vav. We're going to be learning today Daf Lamed Gimel. We left off on Daf Lamed Beis, Amid Beis, in the beginning of the Gemara, 4 lines before the bottom of the Amid. And we're going to have to right now review the Shita of Rabbi Yishmael in the Mishnah. For people that are using the art scroll, please go to page 32b, 1. And as we will see in the first part of today's daf, that the way we learned the Shita of Rabbi Yishmael when we learned the Mishnah is only according to Shmuel. However, Kahana, as he's called here in the Yerushalmi, or as we call him in the Bavli, Rav Kahana, has a very different understanding of Shitas Rabbi Yishmael. We will also have a very interesting use of the word avoida, a word that's used a lot in Hasidus, but as it's going to pertain here to our topic. And we're going to begin today with Halacha Vav. Now, I want to say a few words of introduction for Halacha Vav. Yes, the external of Halacha Vav is more about the unique din of Diluyin, of gourds, but there are certain shiurim that we have to review, and I think it's important, even for myself, to review it now, and then to review it again when we learn the Mishnah. It's very easy, but you have to remember a lot of information. So this is, I think, the right seder of the Hadama to the Halacha Vav and to the Chazara that we'll have to do again and again to, God willing, remember it properly. When a person has 2 different fields of vegetables, the space that's needed in between them for them not to be kalayim is 6 tvachim. Furthermore, when a person even only has 1 single vegetable that's inside a field of another type of vegetables, not only a field to a field, a single plant, a single stalk of vegetables, vis-a-vis a field of vegetables, 6 tvachim. Okay, now what happens if you have a field of vegetables near a field of grain? So we learned the base raiva. Not only does 2 fields of grains of different types need to have a base raiva separation gap, but even a field of vegetables, which vegetables to vegetables is 6 tfachim. But if it's a field of vegetables to a field of grain, you have to have a base raiva. All of these points is not subject to an argument. Now we begin. What's going to happen if you have 1 single vegetable and a field of grain? 6 tfachim. Amazing. 1 single vegetable and a field of grain is like 1 single vegetable and a field of vegetables. We're still lenient here. 6 tfachim. Question is, what about the gourd? What happens if the single vegetable that's near a field of grain is a gourd? As we will see, and I'm going to leave the rest for later, and then the Mishnah is going to speak about a row of gourds next to a field of grain. Weiter, we're going to have differences of opinions, and we're going to have ultimately in the Mishnah actually certain Tanoim b'shem Rabbi Yishmael, and as we'll see, God willing, in the next year, that Rabbi Yishmael himself, as time went on, changed his opinion, demanded if it's between a single gourd inside a field of grain, huge amounts of spaces. There's Rav Meir b'shem Rabbi Yishmael. We're going to have the Tana Rabbi Yossi ben HaChoytef Efrasim, a name that we don't find anywhere else in Mishnayos, Mamish. Another opinion, b'shem Rabbi Yishmael, but all of that is predicated on the Yusoidos that we laid out that we'll review again, a vegetable to vegetable, single vegetable to vegetable, a field of vegetables to vegetables, vegetables to grain, single vegetable to a field of grain, and then bringing that down to the gourd, whether it's a single gourd to a field of grain or whether it is a row of gourds to a field of grain, we will see the shiurim that are needed. This is going to be a very informational, but factual shiurim Mishnah that will be on Daf Lamed Gimel Amid Beis. But again, before we begin that, let's begin with the first part of today's daf. We're going back to Daf Lamed Beis Amid Beis, and the Mishnah. Just to quickly recap, and if you want, Kevin, if you can put up the picture of 32b1 not 32b2, 32b1, and Dafka, the one on the left, to begin with, to learn the Mishnah the way we'll see today. Shmuel learns it, but the way we learned it. The Mishnah is speaking about a field of vegetables, not muksha, not mukshois. So the example that we are giving is onions. A person wants to plant as many rows as one is halachically able to of gourds inside the field of onions. And even though we learned in previous Mishnayos and various rules, so Rabbi Shmuel says the following. And let me read the words of the Mishnah and translate them the way we translated it when we learned the Mishnah, and the way you have it in the picture, which will not be the way we'll begin today's daf, Shitas Kahan. So the words of Rabbi Shmuel is, Oiker shtei shurais, that you uproot from the onions 2 shurais. Now, Chavra, I just want to go from right to left. Jews go from right to left. So what you did was, if you can see, you have a row of onions, and the person uprooted a total of 2 shurais, means 8 amas, before he planted anything, right? 8 amas. And what did he do on the 8 amas? From the 8 amas, you only plant 4 amas. But the way we learned the Mishnah is that the 4 amas of the gourds that you are planting in this newly created space of 8 amas was b'diyuk in the middle of the 8 amas. In other words, you're taking up 4 amas, leaving 2 amas to the right and 2 amas to the left as a gap. And you leave don't forget it, you begin, everything was packed with onions. You leave another 8 amas of width of onions, or 2 rows of onions. And the Mishnah says, so going even further left, you uproot 8 amas, which is 2 shurais. The noita shura achas we touched in the Mishnah in middle of the 8 amas. Dafke, you planted another 1 4 amma row of gourds. If you're planting it in middle of the 8 amma gap, you're going to have a 2 amma to the right and 2 amma to the left. And then you have all the way to the left, you have 2 rows of onions. So what was accomplished over here, and that's the way we learned the Mishnah, and when we quoted the Mishnah even in earlier dafim, is that according to Rabbi Yishmael, you have to have 12 amas of a gap between the rows of gourds. And take a look how you have the 12 amas. You have 12 amas because in the middle of it, 8 amas is onion, but then on each side of the 2 rows of onions, you have a 2 amma gap, 8. 10, 12, you have 12 amas gap. That's the way we learned the Mishnah when we learned Rabbi Shmuel, and we will see that that's only one opinion, that's only Shitas Shmuel and not Shitas Kahana. Now, before we read the Gemara, even if you can now change pictures, you can put now the picture of 32b2. Says our Gemara. Again, it's not that uncommon that in the Yerushalmi, No. 32b2. What are you doing? That we call these great Amiroim without giving them titles. That's a compliment to them. That's because the Yerushalmis really understood who they are, right? Hillel and Shabai. Godoil Miraban is just their shmoy. So Kahana Amar. Now let me tell you how to learn Pshat and Rabbi Yishmael. Not the way we learned it. Not the way we learned it. When the Mishnah says the words that Noiteya Shura Achaz does not mean to dafka plant the row of gourds in middle of the 8 amagap. No. He says that you can plant the row of gourds wherever you want. It fluctuates. Anywhere between the 8 amagap. So take a look at the picture that's up right now, right? He's not even showing you the row of onions on either side of the picture, because that's not the point. If you look at the picture that we're looking at right now, you left 2 rows of onions, which is in the middle of the picture, right? 8 amas width of onions. To the right of the onions, you uprooted 8 amas. 8 amas, that's what the Mishnah says, 2 shurais. To the left of the row of onions, you again uprooted 8 amas. Now, where did you plant the row of gourds in those 8 amas? Kahana holds wherever you want. It could be, what we're looking at is one of the options is that you leave an entirety of 4 amas as a gap from either sides of the row of onions, and you plant the 4 amas, the only 1 row width of gourds in the extremities, And if you were to do it the way we have it in the picture, then actually what you will have between the two rows of gourds won't be like Rabbi Akiva, 8 amos. It won't be the way we learned in the Mishnah, 12 amos. It will be 16 amos. Now, one thing is important before we read the Gemara inside is Kahana is not saying that this is the way it must be. Kahana is saying is that there has to be actually, even Lashitas Rabbi Yishmael, only 8 amos separating between the row of gourds. You only need 8 amos and a row of gourds. That means, Vala, take a look at the picture. If you were to flip, very good. If you were to flip the work area and the row of gourds, the word work, just to know, the word work area means empty space. It's amazing. Avoida, it's called avoida here, and avoida means the empty space. Between 2 row of gourds, Rabbi Shmuel holds 2 things are needed. Minimum of 8 amos, not 12. In other words, he agrees, like Rabbi Akiva, that 8 amos is, but there's something else that's needed. And that is that every row of gourds has to have adjacent to it. Adjacent to it, guys, means in any configuration that you want. You have to have adjacent to it 4 amos of an unplanted space, 4 amos of avodah space. So if you want, you can lay it out the way you have it in the picture. And what did you meet? Gourds and gourds, only 8 amos. But since gourds also extend a lot when they grow, the vines, the leaves, you want to have it to any side of it. It can be a little bit to the right, a little bit to the left. It can be all to the left. It can be all to the right. You have to have 4 amos of work area. And because of that second prerequisite, which is unique L'Shitas Rabbi Yishmael, it could be you're going to have 16 amos. Now we read it inside. Kahana Amar, that Divrei Rabbi Yishmael, do you want to know what Rabbi Yishmael holds? Sometimes you'll need 16. Pramim will be the way we showed the picture in the Mishnah, Shtei. And even if you only have 8 amos, Rabbi Yishmael, it will be good. That if you have to look at the picture again, you have to flip the work area and the gourds to the opposite directions. In other words, if I'm going to put the row of gourds where it says work area to the right, I'm going to put the row of gourds on the work area to the left of the onions. As long as I'm going to have to the outer sides, touching the row of gourds, a chunk of 4 amos of empty space called avoida, then you're good. That's a chassidus of calling empty space avoida, because avoida is only this empty space. If you experience your space to be full, you won't do any work. That's avoida. Oh, let's go. Let's read it on something.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I didn't understand what you were saying about flipping. Flipping what? Which area?
Look inside the picture, Danny. The row of onions, leave where it is. In both sides, not in one, in both sides, take the work area and put their gourds and move the work area where you have the gourds. Do that from both sides.
And if you do that, then you have the gourds right next to the onions, and that's okay?
Then I have the gourds next to the onions, but since the onions is planted in 2 rows, which means that I'm going to have a total of 8 amos between the row of gourds. According to Kahana, even according to Rabbi Yishmael, you 8 amos is enough. But Rabbi Yishmael holds you need something in addition. What do you have to have in addition? That for every row of gourds needs to have for it anywhere to the right, to the left, mixed. You have to have 4 amos of a work area. So if you configure it the way you have it in the picture, actually it's a 16. If you configure it the way we learned the Mishnah, it's going to be 12. If you configure it the way the last option, Pa'amim Shmoina. Let's read them out inside. Avodim is the picture inside because it's in between the gourds and the onions. That's what inside means. Then you're going to have a total of 60. Turning to Daf Lamed Gimel. And Kevin put up both pictures. Oh, here we go. You have pictures, even better. If you're going to have miksasim mibafnim and miksasim mibachutz, if you're going to look inside the top picture of 33a, the top picture is actually the picture that we used in the Mishnah. So again, you have 8 amos, you have more than 8 amos, here you have 12 amos, guy. But you don't need 12 amos, you need 8 amos, plus every row of gourds needs a total of 4 amos of empty space. So you can configure the 4 amos of empty space half and half. Now, you know what the Gemara does not tell you? It can be 3 and 1. It could be 3 and 1. I'll tell you better. It can be 3.5 and a half. I need a total of 4 any way you configure it. And notes, if the top picture, which is the way we learned the Mishnah, then it's going to turn out you'll have 12. Not because Rabbi Shmuel holds you have to have 12. No, you have to have 8. But you also have to have 4 amos of avodah for each row of gourds. And actually, here's the chiddush, Danny, that's exactly what you spoke out before, that if you choose to put the avodah, the empty area, to the extremities, to the mebachutz, then you're going to have the row of gourds and the row of onions mamish touching. Shmoina. Now, I want to suggest, again, I'm not certain, Danny, I want to suggest like this. I don't want to forget halacha gimel. You can't forget halacha gimel. And what we learned in halacha gimel, which I correlated to Shmuel, or not to Rav Kahana, is that even when you're looking at the bottom picture, I can tell you right away, it's not mamish the way the bottom picture is. L'Rabbi Akiva, there has to be a furrow of 6 tfachim by 6 tfachim. Put it in the bottom that separates the gourds and the gourds and the onions. Well, you can't plant vegetables, kalayim, 2 different types. And Rabbi Shmuel learned that the 6 by 6 tfachim, not 6 by 6, 6 tfachim, but mefulash. So I think, Danny, that what should have been the way he made the picture, now 6 tfachim is only 1 amma. Maybe kind of like I'm trying to chap. What is he saying? You don't need to have mefulash here. Maybe you don't need to have mefulash. Maybe only, but the zikr there has to be a furrow of 6 by 6. Maybe you don't have to have mefulash is because you have on the right side and on the left side. Thank you, Kevan. What Kevan just drew out right now. For sure, you need the Rabbi Akiva. For sure. I'm wondering. Maybe Rabbi Shmuel will agree. Why? Because at least you have a work area to the sides of the gourds. No, the goal is when you're looking at it from a helicopter, it doesn't look mixed. Somehow the empty avodah space, no matter where you put it, already gives the appearance of distinctiveness to the gourds that's adjacent, that's a shachin to the work area. So once the gourds look distinctive, they don't look like they're mixing. Okay, let's leave it like that. I can't go more. I don't know more. I'm just saying. I'm just finding it interesting. But how do you reconcile this with halacha gimel? Let's Hashem will enlighten us. Now Shmuel learns the way we learned the Mishnah. Shmuel disagrees with Kahana. No. That Rabbi Shmuel argues with Rabbi Akiva. Actually, it fits with the Chachamim. Rabbi Shmuel holds that you have to have 12 amas of non-gourd space in between the rows of gourds.
2 rows of onions and 2 almost half a row and half a row.
That fits the way dafka. In other words, it's not about having 4 amas work area. It's about one thing. It's about you have to have 12 amas between the row of gourds. And now the Gemara is going to tell you v'tonachin that actually we have a braisa that will substantiate Shitas Shmuel. Now we're quoting a braisa that koitzev al divrei shneim. Right, Rabbi Shmuel Omer, there is a fixed. Koitzev means it's fixed. There is a fixed space between the gourds. Let Rabbi Shmuel 12, Rabbi Akiva 8. Clear. According to Rav Kahana, according to Rabbi Shmuel, it's dafka not fixed. It could be 8, could be 12, it could be 16. And like we mentioned, it could be 8, then it could be 9, it could be 10, it could be 11, it could be any amount. So that's clear. Okay, now says the Gemara, okay, very nice that you found me a braisa that backs up Shmuel. I have a kasha. According to the braisa, Rabbi Shmuel, Amar Shteim Esrei, Rabbanan Amar Shteim Esrei, my B'nei. So what's the difference between the Chachamim and Rabbi Shmuel? Answers the Gemara, I'll tell you the difference. Smicha, al date de Rabbi Shmuel, you're not allowed to put it together. Asur lismay. According to the Chachamim, mutar lismay. In other words, listen to the words that I'm going to say. What were to happen, Vlad, if you have from the 12 amma space between the gourds and the gourds, if it's all packed with onions? So you have
that first picture on the page without
the
the work
first picture
area.
on the page, instead of having a work area, take the middle rows of onions and extend it 2 amos to the right and 2 amos to the left. The Chachamim only hold you have to have 12 amos. And I don't care if it's packed. Again, I think there has to be a furrow on the bottom. L'kula alma, at least a furrow. And that's the whole pshat, according to Shmuel, that not only does Rabbi Yishmael hold, that's the way we learned the Mishnah, that you have to have 12 amos, but in addition to that, there has to be a foolish dika space that is empty between the onions and the gourds. It's not just 12 amos and also lisma. According to the Chachamim, like we had an halacha gimel, we don't care if it's soymech. That will be the nafkamina. Okay. Atkan, we closed halacha hey, and let me just repeat by heart these rules. It's not hard. You have to remember them. And what are we looking at is like this. There is the din of fields that are adjacent. There is a din of individual stalks to a field. There's a difference between vegetables and grains. Bachlal, as we keep on learning, that vegetables that are not planted for their seeds. Let me use those words. And therefore, they're not left in the ground, begashmias, as long as you would leave grain. And therefore, they draw less nourishment because they're not left that long. Therefore, for them, a lesser space suffices of gap for them not to appear mingled. This is a simple statement. Grains are left longer. They take up more nourishment. People look at the fields that way. And even if we're going to go with, again, that midoiraisa, 6 tfachim is enough by everything, for sure midarabanan, maybe even doiraisa, that by grain you have to have a base roiv. Base roiv, we said, is more than 10 amos. Okay? Now, let me go into greater detail. When you have 2 fields of vegetables, different types, 6 tfachim. If you have a single vegetable of type A, single stalk, near or inside a field of vegetables, also 6 tfachim is enough. Because we don't say, Vlad, that since I'm planting a single stalk, don't forget a single stalk is less distinct. One would say, for a single stalk, it's going to look mixed. No, by vegetables, not muksha. By vegetables, not gourds, onions and carrots. So there we say 6 tfachim field, 6 tfachim single stalk and a field. It's 1 amma. It's 1 amma.
24 inches.
1 amma.
24 inches.
I'll stick to my 1 amma. I don't think so. No. Okay. Now, next, when you have 2 fields of grain, again, very simple. 2 fields of grain, guys, you have to have a base roiv if there are different types. Not only that, even though it's a machlokes tanoim, but we're going with how we paskin, that if you have a field of vegetables near a field of grain, we're machmer. We don't say since one of them is vegetables, it suffices with 6 tvachim. Field of vegetables, field of grain, you have to have base roiv. Let's go next. What happens if you have a single vegetable in a field of grain? I understand the logic behind the seder. Then you would think that just like field of vegetables and field of grain, it's not enough for you to have a 6 tvachim. You have to have a base roiva. So maybe a single vegetable and a field of grain, Danny, maybe you also need to have a base roiva. We don't say that. We say that between a single vegetable, not muksha vegetable, which will be the topic of our Mishnah, an onion, and a field of grain, only 6 tvachim is needed. The question that our Mishnah will discuss is how do we view a single, let's say as an example, gourd. Vlad, you with me? I'm saying these steps are important.
I'm just thinking about the 6 tvachim. Is it
Don't
vegetable out or just a 6 tvachim?
Empty space. Okay. And here, and so that's going to be the first question. And we'll see different opinions. The next question will be whether we view a row of gourds like we view a single gourd, or whether there'll be a different rule when it comes to a row of it. Okay. Now, halach, let's read it inside. And we're going to learn the whole Mishnah Gadol. The last biyarak, a single gourd that's planted next to a field of vegetables, then a single vegetable next to a field of vegetables, how much do you need? 6 tvachim. Even though a gourd, as we keep on learning, sometimes demands more space. We have been learning about 2 rows of gourds. We just finished learning that. You have to have 8 amas in between. You have to have 12 amas in between. Oh, no, says the Mishnah, if that's what it's, if it's a single dalas that's being planted near vegetables, just because it's a gourd, the law does not change. It retains the same rules of Yarak. What are the rules of Yarak? Look inside the top Marafula. Haba lita dalas. Dalas is 1 gourd. Eitzel sha'ar Yarakos. Avoidasa, we just had today the words avoida, empty space, is as the Yarak, the last doesn't do anything. It stays the same, which is shisha tvach. But let's go further. But let's be consistent. Then, if you plant a single vegetable near a field of grain, 6 tvachim. But in balita the last eitzel tvua, you were already being machmer. So it's amazing how in the words the last biyarak, kiyarak, the Marafulda is learning 2 things: what the Mishnah writes and what the Mishnah implies. What the Mishnah writes, Vlad, is the last biyarak is kiyarak. What is the Mishnah? Why do you say the last biyarak? Because we're emphasizing, let's go on the negative knowledge. The last bitfua, 1 gourd in a field of tua, won't be like a single vegetable in a field of tua. Single vegetable in a field of tua, 6 tvachim is enough. But here we are beginning the Mishnah implying a single gourd in a field of tvua, you have to have a beis roiva. Even though the Mishnah said that, I know what the Mishnah said, how Bekit said, the last biyarak is kiyarak. But if you're planting a gourd in a field of vegetables, they have a beis roiva. Okay. Like this, guys, Gavaldik. That's Yesod number 1. Now, what happens, like we mentioned in the intro, if you're going from a single gourd to a row of gourds? What do you think, Dan? Should it be more chomer or more lenient? For things to look distinct, when you're saying that if you plant 1 gourd adjacent to a field of grain, you're saying you need to leave a lot of space in between for them not to look mingled. There's a logic to say that's only when it's 1. 1 becomes swallowed up easier. But if there's more of that dalas, maybe you need less space. And indeed, says the Mishnah, that if you have a field of grain and not 1 dalas, here's the key, shura shel deloyim. So here the Tanakama holds, the Chachamim hold that we're lenient. You know how lenient? Mamish, like a dalas biyarak. Mamish. Only shisha tfachim. Which with the logic, because a row already appears as an entity for itself, it remains more distinct. Less space is needed to resolve the appearance of taroivus. That's very lenient. But there's one thing. We did learn a few Mishnayos ago, as a rule, at least that goes, every rule has exceptions, but as a rule, that when you planted something kidin, and then things extended, the argument is, I did it kidin, I can leave it the way it is, not over here. The Tanakama says that a row of gourds goes back to the leniency of only 6 tvachim. That's before the vines and the leaves extend. But the imig dila. But if they extend, then you have to uproot it. There's a big machlokes what the extension means. I'm going to tell you both ways. One way of learning the Mishnah is what? If it extends inside the 6 tvachim. That's a more chamerdik way of learning it. You can plant it. Leave only 6 tvachim. We learned before about angling. If you can manage to angle it in the opposite direction, good for you. But if it grows into the 6 tefach gap, you got to cut it out. That's a very chomurdik way to learn the Mishnah. The other Rishonim learned the Mishnah. No, that if I left a 6 tefach gap and some of the vines and leaves grew into the gap, I'm good. What happens if the vines and the leaves, they grow into the grain? Then already Yakar Milfana. That's a much more lenient way of learning. I want to say words that are not necessary, but maybe they're necessary. What's the difference between this Mishnah and the previous Mishnah? Didn't we just learn that you have to have 8 amas? Then you have to have 8 amas between gourds and gourds. You have to have 8 amas between kishuyin, whatever they are. In other words, if I have gourds and I have in between, then the chavush. Here we're not talking about that. There's only one gourd, the one row of gourds. So it's a row adjacent a field. That has nothing to do with the previous. Same thing, but if it's inside the field, Danny, the gourds. You don't have gourds from both sides. You have the tfuah from both sides. That doesn't matter. The opposite of the previous mission. It's when you have gourds from both sides and the onions in the middle, that's when you got a problem. Because the middle row will look chamushed by the gourds. If you have grain, you have wheat. Wheat doesn't grow that way. It grows up. So it's like a row and a row in a field, a thing in a field. That's what we're learning. So it's amazing. Again, the last only 6 tvachim by vegetables. One the last with the field, base roiva. That's wow. A row says the Tanakh says the Chachamim, but if you have a row of gourds, you go back to 6 tvachim. Elama with this nuance out here, it's going to grow, and at some point you'll have to uproot it, whatever that point is. Hold on. Comes along Rabbi Yossi, and he's more machmer. Now, is he machmer by going to a base roiva? At kedei kachno. One gourd next to a field, guys, I'm reviewing it for myself. One gourd next to a field, base roiva. A row of gourds next to a field, he goes in between. Not a base roiva, but 6 tvachim is not enough. So vifol dafmen, Rabbi Yossi oimer, noisel avidosa arba ames. Avidosa here again, the empty gap that dafka has to be in between the gourds, the row of gourds, and the field of tvua is for anushir, for ames. So amrulai, the Tanakam is the Chachamim. They challenge Rabbi Yossi. Where is your logic? Hasach mirzumen agefen. How can this be more stringent than a grapevine? Now we already learned about the grapevine. And what did we learn about a grapevine, guys? Don't confuse, David, a kedem, a vineyard. And we already mentioned from the next chapter, the minimum vineyard is 2 rows. 3 and 2, we'll see other configurations. There you have to have 4 amas. If you don't have a vineyard, if it's just a vine, halachic, it's more than 1, but it's not a vineyard, you have to have 6 tvachim. Now don't forget that if you have kilayim by a vineyard, the isur is way more chamur than the isur of kilei zeroim. Beginning with, kilei zeroim is muter ba'achila. You have to uproot it. You can eat it. You can replant it. Kilei kenem is also bahano, and therefore kilei zeroim is muter lachatchila b'chutzlatz. Kilei climb from vineyards, as we'll learn in the next chapter. Beginning with the next chapter is asan midrabanan here everywhere. V'chulei. So gefen, that's more chamur. When it comes to the spacing, if you have not a vineyard, but if you have halachically individual grapevines and you're planting next to a field of grain, vifol daf stohabin doesn't 6 tfachim. So when it comes to the diluyin, let's say diluyin got mixed. What's the problem? Problem is that you violated kilei zeraim. I got the problem. Uproot it and eat it. In other words, that it's less stringent. How can the spacing be more? And Rabbi Yossi says one thing has nothing to do with the other. One thing has nothing to do with the other. Why should the severity of the prohibition have anything to do with spacing? Spacing has to do with the appearance of it being mingled. And when it comes to geffen doesn't spread out the way a gourd does. And when you have 6 tfachim, if it's only next to grapevines, it's enough for it to be separated. And by diluting, you have to have more. It doesn't bother him.
How did Rabbi Yossi get 4 amos from? Where did he get that from? How did Rabbi Yossi got 4 amos from where?
I don't know how they got the shiurim. That's amazing, right? Okay. So answers Rabbi Yossi, Amar Lohen, the Tanakam is the Chacham. That's Rabbi. He told them, I'll tell you, Matzinu shezuchmurim and agefen. For sure, to gefen yechidis, shisha tvachim. That is what we're saying. By the way, I want you to know that grain separated from a grapevine, 6 tvachim, machlokes b'shamai and Beis Hillel. We'll learn this in the next chapter. Shitas Beis Hillel, doesn't matter. And everyone agrees that shit that we paskin like Beis Hillel. What about, we began the Mishnah by pointing out, if you have one gourd to a field of grain, how much space do you need to have? L'kula alma. One gourd to a sdei tvua. Beis roiva. Beis roiva, guys. Review. Guys, you understand? Beis roiva is 10 times more than 6 tvachim plus. So you agree to the shiurim. Muzman Zagin, that again, the seriousness of the prohibition vis-a-vis the spacing required are not going on the same track. They're not meshudach, they're not married one to the other. And that's it. That's how he responded to the Chacham. Okay. Now, hold on. When we gave the intro, I know that Atkan, the argument between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yossi is only regarding a road. The Chachamim and Rabbi Yossi agree that a single dalas from a field of grain has to be Beis Roiva. Says the Mishnah, I'm going to give you on that 2 other opinions that are one more chomer than the other, but by leaps and bounds. Like, wow. Like Kevin was asking, how do you get to 4 amas? Listen to this. Now, the Gemara will clarify in the next year that Rabbi Yishmael himself changed his opinion. And that's also important because when you ask him, where did he get it from? And we have the rule, right? It's called, again, the second time I'm forgetting, mechitzin, shiyurin, mechitzin, and maybe esen netiris. Maybe esen netiris. Halacha l'meish misinai. Where's your kid? Someone should find out Chazal. when they say halacha l'meish misinai, sometimes the Gemara says in Babli that these 3, one of them is shiyurim. But halacha l'meish misinai is not subject to arguments. And we're going to see that Rabbi Yishmael in his lifetime changed his mind. And therefore, whoever learned with him when he was younger quoted him with one opinion. And then the Talmidim that came later quoted the same Rebbe, which is normal. When we're living, we have the right to change our minds. Change my mind. But you said, yeah, change my mind. So it comes along. Rav Meir, Rabbi Yishmael, look to how much spacing. Now, they're not talking about a row. We're not talking about a row. A row we already had in the nation. Now we're speaking about a single gourd. Yeah, a single gourd and a base 2 has to have base roiva. Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yishmael, kol shloisha deluyin. If you're planting only 3 gourds in an area of a base saw, and they're not being planted together. So there's one at the side, one in the middle, and one on the other side. You know how much space you need between one gourd and tfuah? You know how much, Vlad? Ad kedei kach, that if you're planting them within a base saw, nothing could be in that base saw. Wow. Now I want to tell you this. One base saw is comprised of 24 base roivas. What's a third of a base saw? 8 base roivas. 8 base roivas. So Rabbi Yishmael says 8 times more than you. That's insane.
It's 80. No, 80 by 80. Because each base roivon is 10.
It's 10 by 10. 80 by 80. 80 by 80. 80 amas is like the boina shalayim for one gourd. Yes, we're not done yet. The next one is much worse. That's Rabbi Meir. And now the final shita, Rabbi Yossi. Now look at this name, Rabbi Yossi ben Hachoitev Efrasim. Nowhere else in the whole Torah Shebaal Peh do you have someone called Hachoitev Efrasim. Now, was that a name? So they say Hachoitev Efrasim. The word of Efra, that he chap mitzvahs. There was a Jew that he chap the mitzvah. So they called him the grabber. Rabbi Yossi ben Hachoitev Efrasim in the name of Rabbi Yishmael. No.
What's Efrasim?
You figure that out. So I know Ephraim, If Rani wants to increase, greedy in mitzvahs, kol shloisha diloim lebeis koir. Guys, one base koir is how many base saws, David? 30. One base koir is 30. 30 times 8. It's 30 times more than I've made. And Mendel, we're getting you. So we know it's like a guzman. They're telling you basically keep gourds. But 1 second, I want to make one thing clear. We're only learning about a single gourd. The moment you plant a row of gourds, you go back to normalcy. Because the row itself allows itself to appear distinct. Let's just read it inside. That kol shloisha deluim lebeis. If you have 3 deluim planted not together, one and one. So they're spaced, not in a base saw. You see, in a base kur, liyavi zera, letoich base kur, not a single other zera is allowed to be planted there. 30 times more than Avnei Mishum Rabbi Yishmael. So I want to just recap the Mishnah, guys. I'm saying this for me, but I hope everyone should chaz. Again, one vegetable in many vegetables, 6 tefachim. A field of vegetables and vegetables, 6 tefachim. It doesn't make a difference. You don't make a difference. A vegetable, a field of vegetables and a field of grain, beis roiva. A single vegetable and a field of grain, we're lenient. L'kulam. Single vegetable and a field of grain, 6 tefachim. Now, in the Mishnah, we have 2 sets of arguments that they're like not overlapping. If you have a single gourd and a field of grain, Bein lechachamim, right, in the ratio of the Mishnah, Bein Rabbi, who's the second Rabbi Yosi? What do you need to have? Beis roiva, ubetfuan beis roiva. Everyone holds of that. What do you have in the ratio of the Mishnah? Machloikes tanoim. If you have a row of gourds, by the row of gourds, either you go back to 6 tefachim, or Rabbi Yosi 4 amas. On the first statement that if you have a single gourd, not a row, a single gourd planted near to a base raiva, on that we have 3 shittas in the Mishnah. Both the Chachamim and Rabbi Yosi, like we mentioned, base raiva, Rav Meir Mishum Rabbi Yishmael, 8 times that. All right, that's what we just mentioned. Exactly, because a base saw has 24 base raivas. A third of a base saw is 8. You have to have 8. 8 base raivas. And according to Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yosi ben Achoy, for us,